Join me, Dr. Diane, as I reframe what it means to thrive in midlife. Subscribe. Your session starts now. Hello, dear listener, and welcome to episode 1 of Reframing Midlife. I'm your host, Dr. Diane Strakowski, licensed psychologist specializing in mental health and now midlife. For those of you who may not know me, I have been working in the field of psychology for over 30 years. A little bit about my background. I'm originally from the Midwest. I was born and raised in Chicago. I now live in California. I have an undergraduate degree in psychology, a master's in counseling, and a doctorate in psychology. Professionally, I've been involved in a lot of clinical trials at Stanford. You might say that I'm a bit of a nerd because I love all things science. In my private practice, my office here at home, I work with individuals, couples, and families. I work with many issues: depression, anxiety, OCD, phobias, grief, trauma, chronic pain, eating disorders, you name it. I'm trained as a cognitive behavioral psychologist. Now, on social media, you may know me, or you may have known me as the Back to Love Doc. I'm now Doc D. But my passion project in the past was to follow reality dating shows like The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, Love is Blind. And yes, I know that the shows are silly, but for me, at least, they provided great examples of what not to do and what to do in dating. And attachment styles, which is another subspecialty of mine. I still plan to follow along and watch, especially the Golden Bachelorette Joan this fall. My other channel is Reality TV Therapy. I'll link it in the notes if you're interested in catching me there. But I'm happy to announce that I'm making a significant pivot because my old focus was more on who I once was, and my new pivot is who I am now. I'm in midlife too. And what you call, or what we all called, the change, I have noticed that there's not as much psychological information about the challenges of midlife. I've spent months now doing my homework, diving into midlife, what issues that women in midlife face, myself included, like feeling invisible, struggling with your identity, being ignored by your doctors, being overlooked in your career, feeling unsure in your relationships. You might be there now. You might be asking, should I get a divorce or start on hormone replacement therapy? And because I'm going through this myself, I thought about how many other women feel alone and scared. And to be honest, on the reality TV dating crowd, I saw a lot of fear there too. And some people not terribly nice. Like, I would get comments, "Who are you, old lady?" I know I'm old, but like, what does my age have to do with my comment? And underneath, I know that the fear is of getting older. But it started me thinking, why are we so hard on women? There's this hypocrisy, the pressures to always look good, age gracefully, but we have different standards for men. No one talks about Andy Cohen's gray hair, but Sarah Jessica Parker gets flack, and she's not even gray. So here I am, starting a conversation with you. I want you to feel intimately involved in each episode, like we're having a conversation in my office. Take me on your nightly walk. I call them my fart walks. After dinner, my husband and I do this. I do this. Another woman had quoted that. But subscribe to my podcast on iTunes and Spotify or anywhere you enjoy your podcast. Find me on Instagram at Doc D. Bear with me. I want to tell you what you can expect from each episode. I follow many midlife experts too. I want to give you one place for all of it: the good, the bad, the ugly, the mess ups, and the beauty fashion hacks too. In my usual flair, if you know me, I love a wig and a dose of humor. I want to cover a wide range of topics related to midlife, not all with psychology, but with my unique twist. Here's a preview what to come. Gray divorce, why older people are getting divorced, libido changes, the toxic products that may be killing you, empty nesting, taking care of aging parents, sleep, the midlife crises, money, fashion, what to wear or what not to wear in midlife, But let's talk about travel, where to go on your next vacation. What are you packing, by the way? Let's talk about beauty hacks, your favorite products, supplements, what color is best for your mood. And have you heard of something called dopamine dressing? Friendships, how to make lasting friendships, especially later in life. We need to talk about nutrition, midlife weight gain, hormones, and so much more. But all of these topics play a role in how you embrace your midlife season and move towards thriving. Before we dig in, I want to hear from you what topics you're interested in. Send me a message on Instagram or find me on YouTube. I read all my comments. Now, what can you expect from each podcast episode? Because this is my first episode, I want to give you a little bit of a primer. First, I'm going to introduce you to the topic for the week. This week, I'm talking about what midlife is. And if you catch the title, it's what do whales and women have in common? We're going to get to that because there's a big lead in and it will make sense. But I'm talking about what midlife is. Next, then I'll give you a cultural context or a setup, like what are people on the streets talking about it? What about social media? What are people saying about the topic? I want to infuse a little humor because let's face it, laughter is the best medicine. Then I want to get vulnerable with you and explain my take on the topic. Some weeks I'm going to be more vulnerable than others. But next, I'll give you what psychology says about the topic. Is there any science that we can learn from? Finally, I want to end all my episodes with a summary and a reframe. Here's my frame that I have. That's what my podcast is called, Reframing Midlife. That's what I do as a cognitive behavioral psychologist. I reframe your thoughts. Okay, so your session is in. Let's dive in. This week, let's talk about what midlife actually is. So, when does midlife start? When does it end? What is the purpose of midlife? Some of you listening today might ask yourself, am I in midlife? How do developmental psychologists define midlife? And can we look at it differently? Can we reframe this time of life? Okay, so to answer the question, let's go to the streets and see what people are saying. Now, I could not find this original video. I saw it months ago on Instagram. There was a woman on the streets in New York interviewing men and women asking the question, what do you consider midlife? This was in New York. The answers were staggering to me. What do you think people said? Well, take a guess. Well, the men on the street, and many of them were most likely like in their 30s, they said things like, well, middle age is 35 to 37. I nearly choked. I said, what? That would mean that a woman would only live till 70 or 72. The average life expectancy for women in the United States is 80. So I guess they're off by only a few years. But the closer you get to that age, the goalpost keeps changing, right? I don't know about you, but I plan on leaving to 100. So when they asked the women, what is midlife? The women got it right. They said 50, 55. And that's what I'm using to describe midlife. Okay. But what are other people talking about on social media? The quotes that are out there are also staggering. Have you heard this one? Men age like fine wine and women like spoiled milk. Excuse me, spoiled milk. They're also using that to describe Gen Z. Now, Gen Z has a fear of aging, and I think it's because there is a lot of negativity out there. They're talking about Gen Z has rapid aging. And it's happening. Gen Z is already from 12 to 27. If they're on an accelerated path to wrinkles, gray hair, reading glasses, we're going to have to blame the environment. But need to push back this idea. And no one, mind you, no one escapes middle age. It's really going to be about how you embrace it. So, what are the women saying? The women like myself who are in midlife. Well, I like the QVC motto, or they call it the age of possibilities. I was talking with a client the other day and I said, when nothing is certain, anything is possible. So the age of possibility is where we are. I like this idea. Okay, so now let's get to the title of the episode. What do whales and women have in common? And I'm going to play you this clip from a comedian because I just can't quite get this right. So listen to this.
Planet Earth to go through menopause are female humans and killer whales. And I'm guessing they weren't killer whales until after they went through it. I'm sure they were fun, outgoing whales with full lips and a good metabolism.
Okay, so I thought that was perfect, but I'm going to get into that a little bit more. Let me dive into my own personal story. And I want to get a little bit vulnerable with you here. I'm 58 years old. I thought I had this whole midlife season kind of nailed until actually this year. And my journey, I get that lingo from The Bachelor, um, turned to be difficult. On The Bachelor, people talk about, again, the love journey, but I'm going to call this my midlife journey, my search for myself. Um, Longer story, I went through menopause at 51. I was on hormone replacement therapy, but I've been off it now for almost 2 years. And I think it took my body that long to come back to actually a bad state. My hormones and my menopause really came raging back, but I was also under a lot of stress. I was, as I mentioned, in the reality dating space. I was actually killing myself. In that space, timing is everything. I'd watch a show, The Bachelor, and then that same night, I'd be filming till midnight. My husband and I would be editing videos. I did like 4 YouTube videos a week, in addition to seeing my clients, being on social media, being a stepmom, a wife. And then I was writing a book actually on reality dating shows and what we can learn. I was already on my second book agent. And if you know anything about publishing, it's not a simple task to even get an agent. My first agent left the agency, went private. My second agent got sick and quit. At the same time, my 92-year-old dad started having some health problems. He lives far away. He's still in Chicago. I live in California with all the stress. I couldn't sleep. I was in overdrive. My cortisol was raging. And then I realized also that my hair was thinning, like falling out in clumps. I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't eat or sleep more than 3 to 4 hours a night for almost 6 weeks. I was having heart palpitations. I thought maybe I have some other underlying health problem, hyperthyroidism. And while the hair part sounds a little bit vain, when you don't know what's going on, it feels like everything's falling apart. And all these stressors kind of accumulated at once. And what they don't tell you when you get older, that you need more time to get over stress. So in addition to that, one more thing, I know it's silly, but like the Golden Bachelor announced that they were getting divorced. And I said, okay, I'm out. The book gave me the message that if this is just too hard, then I'm going to have to pivot. So I had to ask myself, am I having a midlife crisis? And it's not the way that I would originally think about a midlife crisis, like the man who goes out, gets a red Porsche. Now, of course, it's a Tesla, a younger wife, and starts a new family. But for me, it was more like a midlife awakening. And thankfully, I have a husband who supported me. But advice I got from my family and even friends were like, Diane, you've been so stressed out. Why don't you just quit? Just retire already. But that didn't feel right either. I prayed and I prayed. And I have this book, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. The Judy Blume book. Do you remember that? If you're a Gen Xer like me, you remember this book because it was about a young girl, Margaret, who was anxious to get her period. And she wanted to fit into like the cool crowd, but she was questioning God and religion. And I felt the same way on many sleepless nights. I found myself asking, Are you there, God? It's me, Diane. And it got me thinking, why don't we have a book like Judy Blume's book on menopause to help guide us? So I started reading a lot of other books on menopause. And I got quiet and I asked God, what do you want of me? And in answer to my prayers, morning after morning, despite a lack of sleep, I woke up full of ideas for this podcast episodes. And now here I am doing it. But what they don't tell you is that pivoting can also feel like giving up. It's hard to give up something that you've worked so hard for. However, I'm just trusting this process. I'm trusting that you're going to be here with me to share all of these topics because I've thought long and hard about how midlife has affected me. And it's not just the most recent bout, but I've had infertility problems. I got married later in life, and that's why I was in the dating space. I've had early menopause. I guess it's early as you can relate to 51. Decreased libido, painful sex, I'm still struggling with. As I mentioned, hair loss, sleep issues, hormone replacement. I felt dismissed by doctors, like I had to go to this back end kind of to get bioidenticals. I then had a breast reduction because what they don't tell you is that, at least for me, my boobs kept growing and my back was hurting. Now I have osteopenia. Of course, there's the midlife weight gain. And then there's identity and confidence. Now, to be clear, in this podcast, I'm not sharing medical information as much as my personal experience about what's worked, what hasn't. I'm a guinea pig to all of this too. But I want to bring on experts, and I will, to share what works for them. But I've always told my clients I wouldn't tell them to do something I haven't tried myself. No one likes the phrase, do as I say, not do as I do. But if I'm going to suggest that you meditate, do yoga, do polyvagal exercises to improve your communication skills, or any of the like, you can bet that I've tried these things myself because you need someone who's been there, who's tried it, who's doing all the things. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but I hate being pushed a bunch of ads for like hair loss treatments by people who have thick, lush manes, or they're talking about rosemary oil as if it's the only treatment necessary. But I'm using myself as a test subject, someone who's been on hormones, again, was off hormones. Now I'm recently going back on them. I'm a big personal accountability and transparency person. I do want to share the good, the bad, the ugly, what works, what doesn't. And as a psychologist, I know the power of a supportive community and loneliness and how scary it can be. Because maybe your other friends are not talking about these things, but we can talk about everything here because I want to help you own your best midlife. All right, let's get to what psychology says. What do they, psychologists and developmental psychologists, say about midlife? Now, if you remember anything about Psych 101, the founder was Piaget, who was among the first to study developmental psychology. Then we had Erik Erikson, who came up with 8 different life phases. Now, what I like about Erikson's model is that he says that at each phase, there's a crisis or a task and a virtue we need to develop. Erikson describes midlife adulthood as being anywhere from 40 to 65, bigger than just menopause, right? Though many people now are saying it's more like 45, 55. But Erikson said that the crises that we're focused on in midlife is generativity versus stagnation. That's a mouthful. Generativity, meaning to be generative, I'm going to get to the whales, versus stagnating. So he means that you are either giving back or you're stagnating. But here's the virtue that you need to develop at this stage: care. I don't know about you, but another book that I'm really enjoying, The New Menopause by Mary Claire Haver. And in this book, she suggests, Dr. Haver, excuse me, that the midlife purpose was to care for ourselves. And that goes along with the virtue of care. So this resonated with me. And I'm calling it midlife more than menopause because it can be a long span, right? Menopause you go through, and that period can be 7 to 14 years. It's the transition, right? And perimenopause can start even in your 30s, or it can be medically induced. By this definition, then, the transition can be up to age 65. But your body essentially is adapting to less estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Menopause is when you realize that you haven't had a period for a year and that everything after that is post menopause. But think about it. If you're going to live to 100, like I plan to, that you're going to live a third or half of your postmenopausal life. Technically, anything after 65, according to Erikson, is older adulthood. Okay, so now that you know about midlife, what is its purpose? I was actually out with a friend of mine and she's asked me this question. Why do we go through menopause? Honestly, I was stumped. It got me thinking about whales and that clip that I saw from the comedian. But killer whales and women actually do have a lot in common. They're one of the few mammals also to experience menopause. Now, I did some more research on this because, as I like to, I want to look at the science. And there was a study in Nature magazine just this March 2024. Scientists have looked at this rare phenomena. Several of these species are toothed whales, killer whales, beluga whales, narwhals. You know the narwhal in Elf. Not only do whales go through menopause, and researchers have identified that older whales play an integral role in their pods. Short-finned pilot whales live up until they're 54 years old, but they stopped breeding at age 36. Killer whales, females stop breeding at about 48, but they can live to 90. Does that sound familiar? Researchers examined the life history of whales with and without menopause and how this affected the number of offspring, or what we call the grand offspring. The results were fascinating, suggesting that menopause allows the older females to help the younger generation in their families improve their chances of survival because they are no longer competing for resources. All right, so the female whales live way beyond the males, that they only live till about 30. The females live, again, much later, till their 80s or 90s. This is what is important, the crucial role that the females are playing. So I started to think, is that my purpose too? Now, I don't have a pod, but now I have a podcast. Okay, I know I'm a little corny, but there's pros and cons that the killer whales have a purpose. Now, to be fair, in the United States, I don't believe that older women are as revered as they are, say, in different countries. If you watched the Blue Zones, you see that in other countries they revere older people as wise, and not so much in the United States. We are very youth conscious, shall we say. Again, this whole idea that you have to age gracefully. But I found it interesting that we also have to look at it that sometimes women, do we also always have to be generative? Like, what if I'm just tired? What if I don't want to give to my pod or my family? What if I just want to sit on the couch and wail around and not do anything? Isn't that okay for me to do? I think it is. I think it is. You deserve it. You've worked hard. But I do find it interesting that whales and women have some things in common, that despite the fact that we are so different in other ways. Now, I searched even deeper asking this question about what is the purpose of midlife. And I found another different, an interesting analogy. Have you heard of the paradox of the aging curve? I liked this way of looking at it. So, what do you think is the happiest stage of life? And what about the sadness? There were two researchers, Blanche Flower and Oswald, in 2008. I know it's old. They found that reported levels of unhappiness and depressive symptoms peak in the early 50s for men in the United States and in the late 30s for women. Now, in Western Europe, sadness was the highest around the mid 40s for both men and women. But in this curve, the older people, 50 and plus, were happier than the younger people despite some cognitive and functional losses. What's happening is that more neuroplasticity, meaning flexibility, leads to more life, and that older people, thankfully, report more self satisfaction, positive community engagement. Older people also have more empathy, compassion, self knowledge, openness to new ideas. And let's look at their brains. Brain imaging studies show that older people are less responsive to stressful images and more likely to remember happy images than angry ones. As a therapist, this data makes me excited. Older people generally have better emotion regulation skills. The same group knows how to prioritize emotionally meaningful goals and social interactions. This goes back to developmental psychology, where one of the things they say in older life, you think of time left versus time spent, which really gives you perspective on not giving a crap about certain things. But for me, I also like to look at women who are a little bit ahead of me, right? Jodie Foster, for instance, I had seen an interview with her, and she says you only get happier in your 60s. I like that because I am following a lot of women in their 70s. My mother is in her 80s. She's still fit. She works out. She looks great. Okay, so let's get to the practical wrap up. Midlife, it's long. And for those of us who are lucky enough to age, you can expect, as I said, to spend as much as a third or half of your life postmenopausal. For me, I'm going to focus on the positives of midlife. It's time for your reframe. So, how can we think about midlife differently? Instead of thinking of it like it sucks, I'm going to look for the positive. Like I can wear white jeans and not have to worry. No periods means no cramping. I care a lot less about what other people think. I know I mentioned the comments, but at this point, you really know who your people are. I'm now hustling less. I made my pivot. I hope you're hustling less too. Now, this may not be true for you if you are still worried about money. We're going to get into that, but hopefully you can just slow down just a little bit. Now, the good thing about aging is more confidence, right? You've lived life, you understand what's really important, what isn't. And if you're lucky, you have more freedom, more time. You know, what you like, you're better at self care. Now, let's get into your homework, okay? Because I want you on your fart walks to come back and actually think about making the most of this time. Your time is precious. I want to give you some therapy homework. All right. This is actually a little bit of free therapy for you. What I'd really love you to do is actually have a journal. Call it your therapy journal. Take out some notes. But I want you to ask yourself, what is the purpose of your midlife? And here are a few journal prompts to get you started. I'll put them in the notes too. What do you think when you think of midlife? Are you in perimenopause? Are you in the year of menopause, not having your period? Are you postmenopausal like me? What possibilities do you see for your midlife? More importantly, what fears do you have about midlife? What's been the worst part about midlife for you thus far? Can you relate to the killer whales? Are you struggling with your mood, your relationships? Are you cranky, moody? And what's been the best part of midlife? What surprised you about your midlife journey? I'm going to come back next week and ask you those questions, see if you have some interesting follow ups. Please respond on YouTube and I'll go back and look at your answers. But thank you for joining me for this first episode on your midlife journey. And in the next few weeks, we're going to talk a lot more about relationships. Stay tuned and thank you so much.